Welcome to the channel, David. How are you?
Pretty good. Thank you for having me today, Kyron.
Not a problem, not a problem. It is such a relief to have such a brilliant mind on board, and hopefully a lot of people can understand a lot of the fundamentals behind Saito and what you guys are actually doing. For those of the audience who don't actually know who you are, could you give an insight into who David actually is and what is Saito?
Sure. I'm a tech entrepreneur from China. My background academically is economics. I've done tech stuff most of my career, along with my co-founder, Richard Harris. Both of us got into Bitcoin reasonably early. We lived through the block size wars, and Saito is a product of that. What we do is we fix underlying economic problems in proof of work and proof of stake, where people doing what's in their interest leads to outcomes that are bad for the blockchain as a whole. And that's either there's way too much data, or the networks aren't paying for the things that they need to pay for and they should be paying for. So Saito is a layer 1 blockchain. It comes out of a long history in blockchain, plus also an economic orientation to understanding that the real problems aren't technical, they're incentive based.
Excellent. Thanks, David.
You can just pay for one pass through this transient blockchain and then happily let your transaction fall off. And there are a lot of use cases in crypto where you want to do that. And the fee that you're going to pay is a lot lower, but also because you don't need the data on floating around forever, the people that do are going to find it's cheaper for them to actually have that service. So it's about increasing the cost. It's about increasing the size of the blockchain, because we can get the blockchain. We could say like the looping blockchain is like, it's a 1 petabyte in size, and it can never get too big. It's not going to grow up to 10 petabytes. We can keep it at that size. It's about having the cost of data moving through the chain be as low as possible. It's about sustainability, and it's also, though, it's about fixing an underlying economic problem that other mechanisms have. And that underlying problem is, with a permanent ledger, the miners, the block producers, they get paid based on how much they add. And their economic incentive is to add as much data to the chain as they can, because that's how they get paid. And when people understand the Saito mechanism, first they think of it as like, okay, technically, how does it work? The real understanding is realizing that there's a cost to process this data for 50 years. And if you, as a block producer, are adding transactions that are not paying enough, you personally are losing money. So it's about aligning it's changing a behavioral pattern, which is we go from, I maximize my interests as a block producer by just throwing spam and crap on the chain, to I maximize my profits by adding only as much data as the chain can actually profitably support. And That's the profound shift, because that's the difference between the blockchain collapses and the blockchain will survive forever.
So it's really scalable. Very scalable.
Well, it solves what's known as the tragedy of the commons problem, right? Like where I do this work that creates social losses because it's profitable for me.
Yeah.
And what this structure does is it says, no, there's no way for you to do that without taking losses yourself.
Okay.
You can put more data on the chain, but you've got to have run that chain for 50 years now. Which means if you're accepting too low a cost, you're accepting stuff that's going to make you yourself operate at a loss.
Okay. Yeah. And actually on that,
I don't know if that's clear.
No, that is clear. You
start with a technical explanation,
yes.
But the really important thing is fixing that incentives. Because if you think of the Bitcoin block size debate, everyone's like, what's the solution? Let's add a data cap. And it's like, no, you add a data cap, you limit security. You don't add a data cap, you're letting miners spam and bloat your blockchain. The only solution is stop miners from wanting to spam the blockchain. And that's what Sato fixes.
Okay.
It's an incentive fix.
And that kind of brings me to my next question as well, David. And that is, how do you compare to other layer one blockchains? And if you can elaborate on the facts that actually set you apart from the business and the technical side as well.
That's such a big question. I'd say what sets us apart is that we don't have these incentive problems. And what that means is that over time, as networks scale, incentive problems get worse and worse because the amount of profit you can get out of an incentive misalignment grows. Like think of a small country versus a big country like the United States. In smaller countries, there's less profit available from political corruption, so there tends to be less of it. In big countries like US has huge issues with big pharma, et cetera, because there's so much money at stake, It's kind of the same with incentive problems in blockchain. So fixing these incentive misalignments fixes a lot of problems technically. Sato doesn't have a scalability trilemma. We can talk about why.
Yeah.
Sato doesn't have a 51% attack. We can talk about why. Sato is the only blockchain without what Vitalik calls a discouragement attack. That's when you just spend your own money to set up like a 51% attack later.
Sure. Yeah.
So there are all these technical consequences of the changes that Sato makes, but the fundamental improvement is that by eliminating these economic problems, these misalignments, the opportunities for participants to cheat in ways that get them a bit more money and pass costs on to someone else, fixing those problems means the network actually is going to live and survive, and it's not going to eat itself. And what we're expecting to see is that Sato will slowly grow and expand. And as these other networks expand, the problems in them are going to become more and more obvious until they collapse into basically corporate or permissioned chains.
Okay. Actually, you've mentioned the scalability trilemma, obviously brought about by Vitalik. Could you possibly expand a little bit more on how you plan to sort of overcome this kind of well and truly known issue in the space?
Well, sure. The first thing to note is that it doesn't exist. But maybe I can start by explaining what does exist. So what we've got something that's it's a budget constraint. It's a resource allocation problem. So you've got a blockchain. It's running at massive scale. You can't make it any bigger. Picture this blockchain. That blockchain has a certain amount of money in fees and income. So you got to pay. You can scale. You can spend that money on really powerful computers, right?
Yep.
Or you can spend that money on a lot more less powerful computers. So you got a limited budget, and you've got to decide if you're spending your money on scale, the powerful computers, or decentralization, a lot of computers that are spread out. Do you understand? You understand that this is it's a budget allocation problem, Kyron?
I do now. I actually didn't. You've explained it very well. Yeah.